Welcome to another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder. This week, I invite Joe Lego, who is the host of the Strength Coach Experience podcast, on the show to talk about all things conditioning, especially his experience in minor league baseball with the New York Mets. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. So what got you into podcasting, first of all? I mean, you've got the Strength Coach Experience podcast. And was that like born out of COVID or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was fortunate, right when COVID happened, I was in the city. I lived in Brooklyn. I was there for about 12 years. That's where I went to college. We'll get into that later. But anyway, I was staying with a family and I was training them. One of my athletes, one of my younger kids, now he's going to go to college soon, but they said, hey, would you be interested in coming with us to Florida? We're leaving right now. It's on March 13th of 2020. And, you'll stay with the family and you'll train and you can make money and I'll pay you to train all the kids, because two of them played soccer, one played baseball. And, fortunately I went down there and every day I would call people, I would call my other strength coaches and colleagues and different things. And I actually got asked to be on a podcast because I have cerebral palsy, a very low level, but that's kind of how I got very into, working out in the first place. But I was on somebody's podcast and the way that they did it, I love being on the podcast. I loved talking and I loved answering the questions, and it's always something I've, enjoyed doing. And, I was talking to my friend, he said, you should start a podcast. I put it out there and they were like, you need to speak more. You need to do whatever you can to kind of get, your voice out there, because you have a natural kind of cadence and everything else. So I ended up meeting another person. I was on their podcast and fortunately they helped me. And long story short, it was just a way to reach out to my friends and connect, sit on the computer and talk for 2 hours, because I would have these amazing cell phone conversations with my, colleagues and things like that. And I was like, wow, we should record these. And then it just kind of turned into a way to reach out to, new people and kind of get to know people while we were in lockdown.
That's fabulous. Now, if you don't mind, I'd love to talk to you about cerebral palsy and strength and conditioning. It's in some ways, what a great gift to find a way into the rooms of strength conditioning. But what I find that when I have clients with particular issues or situations, they are the experts and I learn from them. So, what would you look for when you're working with somebody with your particular situation, cerebral palsy? What are the things that you would try to focus on or avoid? Are there contraindications? I'm curious, because to be honest, in the 30 years I've been training, that is one area of which I have little experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So for just personal story, I have hemiplegia, which is of the left side. So I was born 3.5 months early. I was tiny and craziness, but thanks to my parents, they kind of pushed, right? It was like when I was born, they're like, we can wait. And my mom's a nurse and my dad, very hard nosed. And they're like, no, we're going to do everything we can to kind of get him to be, I don't want to say normal, but, allow him to do everything you can. So I started going to school and therapy. And I played all the regular sports growing up. And what that allowed was that I wasn't really placed into, you have a disability, right? I knew I had something going on, like obviously, but I just kind of did the normal things. And fortunately, when I was, unfortunately, but when I was in high school, I had a coach, we started lifting, right? We did box squat and bench press and bigger, faster, stronger, right? We box squatted, we power cleaned, and we bench pressed, and we would run before that. And I hurt my back my senior year because I had no idea what I was doing in the weight room. Like, everybody out there that thinks we all love this the second we got there, I hated working out in high school. I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. We'd go in there and I was just miserable the whole time doing all these things. Nobody really taught me. And I hurt my back. So after I got hurt, I was like, okay, I need to kind of figure out a way to do this on my own, because most people I know, and it's nothing against them, they don't really know how to train somebody like me. And, fortunately I was able to work out, and then I went to college and I played a year and then, with grades and things. But just to touch on, what you asked originally is, as I started getting involved in exercise, I had to learn the contraindications and all the little nuances in it, because my body pulls right-sided, right? My right hand, my right side is the dominant side. So when I did, like a pull-up, let's say, something easy, I would gravitate towards one side. So I had to learn to kind of settle myself down and allow the one side to work, right? So doing a lot of unilateral things and isometric stuff on one side. And fortunately, I was able to get my strength, about even. So going into college, after junior college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got into training athletes, and we started taking classes, for athletic training and for, sports specific training. And right when I started doing it, I just realized that I had a better understanding of how the body moved and how it worked than everybody else. And I could look at somebody and say, okay, their left hip is tight, so it causes their femur to turn in, and we have to fix these things. And it just it was like a light bulb went off, right? Because I wasn't a very good high school student, right? Really didn't care about statistics and math and all those things. But when I got into college, fortunately, it was kind of like a light went off. The anatomy came, anatomy's hard for everybody, but the anatomy came natural. But when I got to kinesiology, I was just able to break down, all those things. And then, the final point is, I met a staff of people at LIU in Brooklyn, where I went to college, where they kind of took me right under their wing and they let me coach. So I got that whole fear part right out of the way because they threw me in the fire. And then I just got real confident in changing people and doing the things that I could, identify with somebody right away, right? I was very not bashful at all, right? I would just dive right in there and be like, look, this is kind of what's going on. And the stuff worked. And the more experience I gained, the kind of better I got at the exercise, or the technique eye, if you will.
So you got your degree at Long Island University in kinesiology or exercise science?
Yes, in Brooklyn. Yeah, I got master's and bachelor's.
Master's, okay. Fabulous. And then you've gotten your certified strength conditioning specialist through the NSCA. You've done performance and specialist, PES, and also did some time with Personal Training Institute, right? I mean, you dove deep.
Oh yeah,
really
yeah.
deep.
I actually, I started working at gyms at 16. I started working at Gold's Gym, and I just loved it. The training part, and then I got to the athletic part, and now I kind of do a little both. Not teams anymore, but I just immersed myself. I kind of got obsessed with figuring out how to be the best at this stuff. And you can probably attain to. I feel like now we're getting towards more data and analytical degrees. But when I came up, and certainly probably you too, it was more about trying to figure out, trying to learn everything so I could offer the best product to everybody. And I was I think at the tail end of that. Now it's CSCS, masters, and then try to get to know as many people as possible. But I feel like when I was coming up, it was kind of dig around and try to learn, as much as we can, and I also had the pleasure of working with Mike Borowitz when I was with the Mets, and I got his certification, and I think he was amazing as a teacher and just as a friend.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, in terms of mentors or guiding lights, people in the industry or with outside the industry, who are the figures that you started latching on to that gave you certain direction? And are there people right now that you continue to do that with?
Yeah, absolutely. I first and foremost, Richard James, who was on my first episode of my podcast. He's at Poly Prep in New York. He was the strength coach at LIU when I was there. He ran track there, and he was real instrumental in kind of identifying me as a strength coach and letting me go into the fire, right? Like I said before, he was real big on, I have confidence in you. I'm going to give you confidence, and then you're going to go make it happen, right? And whatever happens, we'll adjust. It wasn't, you did this wrong, and it wasn't about pulling you apart. It was gaining your you're getting your confidence up, and then along the way gaining knowledge. After that, I had the pleasure to go to TCU with Zach Dakin for baseball, who's still there. One of the other reasons why I moved here. And that was my first internship outside of New York, right outside of the mid-major. And what that did for me was he taught me how to, be open-minded to a lot of different things, right? And say, okay, just because your strength coach or your mentor does these exercises does not mean that they're perfect for you to do. You have to make sure that when you do exercises, they follow your philosophy and they're what you believe in, right? And it wasn't in a negative, but it was like, we did some things, leg extension, leg curls and things like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, it was, he was like, well, why do you do these? And I'm like, oh, well, we do these at LIU, right? And he was like, well, no, you need to make sure that you have a kind of a explanation for everything that you were to do. And he really taught me. And then when I went back as a graduate assistant, Eric Cressy, obviously, Lee Taft, who I've had the pleasure of having on my podcast twice, who's an amazing person. And then, luckily with the Mets, it was Mike Borowitz, and little things like that. And then just as a side note, I'm a big Jordan Peterson person too. And I got involved in mindsets and in psychology, Grant Cardone and those people. That's kind of the new venture I've been into, because I realize, we don't really learn business in this realm. So it's important to get there too. So those people are, too very instrumental as well. And to the last part of the question, yeah, I still talk to many of the colleagues. Like I said, I still keep in touch with certain people. Sometimes, we get away from things, 5, 6 months or a year will go, but I really try to kind of keep those, those relationships there, because that's pretty much what this is all about.
So, what has your philosophy or approach evolved into from those days of LIU with selectorized equipment to now? What would you say in terms of strength conditioning? What is your base philosophy?
My base philosophy is, obviously no person is the same, and I think that I don't really like to pigeonhole myself, meaning that once I have an athlete, right, or have a team, identifying what they need is most important, right? Whether mobility, right, starting at that base, the mobility stuff. However, if you have certain athletes that don't need that, it's okay for them to progress, right? I don't like the thing where everybody kind of stays at one area of the race, if you will, while other people are, kind of suffering from that. And then as we progress, it's really, I write everything down. I use block systems. However, I don't stick to, the paper 100%. If somebody comes in and they're not feeling right, or somebody comes in and they feel great, we're going to kind of push that energy on the day. So a lot of mobility stuff, right? Making sure that they have the GPP, making sure that they have the baseline, but then once they're there, being able to do different things, right? I believe in lifting heavy during season. I'm a huge Louis Simmons, pushing the envelope with the, raising testosterone levels during season, right? I'm not into the maintenance work where you do 3 sets of 12 on bench press and, you're just kind of keeping it moving during season. I really believe in pressing and overspeed eccentrics. And I also believe that, when you do the beginning work, right, it's kind of like wearing the body out, right? How many movements can I kind of fit into an hour and a half and kind of almost exhaust the body from the top down, right, for 4 to 5 weeks, and really getting it to push and laying that concrete foundation. Then we can go into more, structured stuff to strengthen certain areas in which you need. However, along the way, making sure that we're keeping the mobility, right? If you have a bad day, or you come in and let's say we're doing 6 sets of 2 on 95% deadlift, right? If you're feeling something in your hip, being able to go back to that mobility stuff we started in the off season and still being able to introduce those things. So kind of a balance of mobility, right? Making sure the movements are there, but then, using the power stuff and not really being afraid to push the athletes as well, and keeping them safe is most important.
So that requires a form of assessment at the onset so that you're understanding what the needs analysis is of your athletes or clients, but then to make sure your compass heading is in the right direction in terms of if you're providing the proper overload or program intensity or whatever the case may be, there needs to be a continual reassessing to make sure. So what are the tools that you use? What are the methodologies and approaches that you have in regards to assessment?
I use FMS. I don't use the whole thing, but I do use parts, squatting and things like that. I do use gait analysis as well. I also like to see, how they move around, but a lot of parts of the FMS and just watching them move, just putting them through a general workout after we do the nitty gritty stuff with the FMS and just seeing how they move, seeing how they react to things and kind of putting them to positions. I think I do, unilateral things as well, right? Can they balance on one leg? Can they translate to the other one, right? So kind of a mix of the FMS, using those core movements, but then also watching them walk, watching them jump and move, and then kind of figuring out, lastly, where the stability is on both feet, and then also shoulder stability and range in that area as well.
So you don't necessarily use any sport specific kind of screening procedures for, say, a baseball player versus a football player or a basketball player. You're strictly sticking with the FMS and some form of gait analysis.
Yeah, just because it's one of those things as well. As we go through the FMS, if they have something that they can't do, right, obviously, you can identify, okay, that's from the sport. I'm not going to try to change that, but no, yeah, not anything based on what they're able to do, more based on a general outline of how the body moves. That way, we make sure that they're okay. Because the last thing I think, I think some of the issues too is that if you do that 100% with sports specific, right? You have a football player, like, oh yeah, his shoulders are rounded and he's all forward because he plays on the line. that's might make him better as a, as an offensive line for a short time. But as you know, after, a while of being in those compromised positions, we're going to have an injury. So instead of treating everybody, okay, yeah, they play basketball, so they're, they might have tighter this or better flexibility, or they play baseball, right? They're going to have a hike on that opposite or the same trap that they're throwing with, or same thing with football. It's more of, okay, what are their entire flaws, or what are some of the compensations that they carry. That way, if I can fix that and then kind of teach them how to get into those things or fix those, the injury rate goes down. But obviously, I also believe in, if you have certain blaring things like we just talked about with football, you don't really want to change those either, right? I'm not going to go into a guy who throws 100 miles an hour from the right side and start pulling apart his obliques and making sure that he's the Da Vinci model, if you will, because there's a reason why one side's tighter than the other, right? That's where his velo comes from.
So it sounds also like you're doing some type of structural analysis with their posture. Is that appropriate to say?
Yeah, I do like the boards, with the lines on the back. I forget what is an Ogolo board or something
Sure.
like that. Yeah, just kind of seeing where they are, and at this point, in coaching, it's I'm able to tell those things. I think that's the best probably I've gotten at over the years with the experiences. Having an athlete walk in and just watch them do certain things and being able to kind of pick those things apart, and identifying certain discrepancies.
So, and then how does that carry on to their program design in terms of strength and conditioning or whatnot? Say you've got somebody who's got a left hip or pelvis that's hiked up, or their right shoulder's more elevated than their left, or they've got rounding the shoulders or some type of counter rotations. Do you address those within the program itself, or what?
Yeah. So just to go back, the CNS stuff I do use. I mean, I have taught the CNS course and stuff. It's not on the thing, but that's more what I use things like that from NASM in order to evaluate those things. So when they initially start out, once we've identified what's going on, upper cross syndrome or hike hip, we use the CNS and the NASM stuff to kind of put it back together, right, and identify those things, and using the integration and the foam rolling and isometrics and things like that. And then once we get them to a place that I'm happy with, and obviously involving the athlete as well, making sure they feel good, that's what we can push. The only difference is, I think for me, is I don't spend the entire session on corrective exercise, right? I'll add it in a little bit here and there, and then we can get to the workout, because I find that makes it dry, right? If you have somebody that just signed up or wants to get better, and you're going to come in and do an hour-long CNS program or one of those things, they're going to get bored, and I think that's important too. We have to kind of keep these kids, with their, when their phones are away from them, you only have about 12 seconds anymore to give them something else to do. So I think it's very important to identify why we do these things, right? Fix the things in there, but then kind of let them also do some heavy lifting or things that they want, because that way, they're going to be more receptive to trusting you in the future.
Yeah, agreed. I think the corrective industry, shall we say, the whole philosophy, that pendulum has swung far off to one side, and we have got people that's all they're focusing on for the entire session, when it should be something that's overlaid or a filter into every movement that you're doing. Kind of like originally when you said that one of your mentors asked you why is it you're doing this and why is it you're doing that. You better have a good reason for everything that's in an individual's program, not just because this is what somebody else taught me to do, but to actually understand what is the outcome physically for this individual when I give them this particular movement, mobility drill, whatever, corrective, or anything else for that matter. You bring up something else, Joe, and that is unilateral training. I know that talking with Mike Boyle, Mike has really come on hard and going strong with unilateral. He does very little bilateral symmetrical lifts these days, much more into the contralateral or unilateral approach. And it's something that you kind of almost organically found in your own body in terms of the imbalances and so on. So with the programs that you have with your athletes, knowing that if we're talking baseball, that it is a rotational sport, therefore you're not going to find a lot of symmetry in a body that is continually creating torsion or rotation. How much bilateral movements are you creating in a program, like in percentage wise, versus unilateral or contralateral? Is it still like the bedrock? Is it 50% of the selection, or is it less?
I use probably 50%, because I do love the Mike Boyle stuff with the unilateral, and I do like to use it. It's just, I think it's hard that pitching is a full body experience, right? So if we only stuck to unilateral, I don't think it allows them to get the full effect of how much power they can produce. So we still, big on the potentiation with plyometrics and, deadlifts or plyometrics and squats. But besides the squat and the deadlift, I'm all unilateral, right? Elevated Bulgarian squats, one-legged jumps and, reverse lunges, walking lunges, balancing, single leg RDLs. So I do still like to keep the bilateral stuff in there. However, aside from, variations of the squat as well, right? With baseball players, I don't really like to use the back squat, but, again, I'm a big safety bar person, but if I have a player who doesn't like the safety bar, obviously I'll let them back squat. But, just aside from the deadlift and the squat, I don't really like to do a whole bunch of unilateral stuff, more to the bilateral. However, with plyometrics, though, I do like bilateral. Box jumps, side box jumps, rotating box jumps, things of that sort in the sprint work.
All right. So then, not to kind of belabor this or put you on the hot seat, but I'm kind of wondering we're taking the baseball player, we'll take a right-handed pitcher, and as they're going through their motions, that left leg is leaping out, and that hip is going into flexion while the right hip's extension. There is rotation of the pelvis. So we've got one hip internally rotating while the other one's externally rotating. We've got the counter rotation of the rib cage while the pelvis is going one direction, the ribs are going the opposite. And they are continually training this for thousands upon thousands of repetitions, developing these kinematic sequences that are going to create more dominant internal rotation on one leg and external rotation on the other. And then you throw them into some type of squat. How do you address the neurological or neuromuscular bombardment that they have gone through? And is it like, I think some trainers just expect everything just to work just because I put them in a bilateral movement. Like, are there actions that you do with a right-handed pitcher when they're doing a parallel squat so that you've got proper internal rotation symmetrically, bilaterally, and external rotation when you need it?
Yeah, with me, it's, always with they hate me in the beginning because when we first start, it's all goblet squats and body weight stuff and, all that thing. So for me, it's getting the pattern hammered in, right? I spoke about the GPP before. It's just overdoing the reps, if you will, right? Identifying what's wrong, right? And then I'm big on communication as well, explaining to a pitcher what is going on, right? Here's what's going on. Do you feel that? No or yes, right? Putting them in positions where, do you feel the weight shift? Do you feel these things going on? Once we identify what's kind of going on, right, with, different mobility stuff, right? FRC, things of that sort, then we put them in the squat, but I have them squat. I don't let them touch barbells or anything else until we kind of get that form back into place, right? So a lot of goblet stuff, a lot of things like that, sandbags I like, and that I also like you can use the bands now. I mean, there's so much stuff that we have available to us, but yes, to answer your question, for me, I hammer in the foundation stuff, right? The preseason one, if you want to call it that, right in September in college baseball is always been just hundreds of reps of that goblet squat and everything else. And then when everybody understands that, then we go into the other thing. Because again, you're right. We're dealing with somebody who's their body's all over the place, right? Pitching's unnatural, swinging's not good for your body. So, instead of trying to counteract all of that, right? Because I've seen that too. Oh, I'll just have them, throw a med ball 700 times on the other side, right? We can't do those things. A lot of them have been thrown since they were 5. But for me, it's just hammering out those basic patterns before we're able to go. And to answer your question as well, in the preseason, a lot of unilateral stuff. I put the squat there and the deadlift because I know that's going to be a staple as we get through the hypertrophy part and the, moving into max effort. However, it's mostly deadlift and squat, and then we go into a lot of unilateral, a lot of balancing stuff. Same thing with the upper body, right? TRX rows, but then, single arm kettlebell movements and things like that. Not real big. I don't do overhead press and, barbell bench press, right? Everything upper body too is all unilateral, right? The leg stuff is, the deadlift and the squat, as I said before, but, if we get into upper body, I do all unilateral. I don't do anything with 2 hands unless it's some sort of carry or maybe they're throwing a med ball. But other than that, everything's unilateral.
So then when you're in season, because you mentioned this earlier, that you push hard through the in season, where there's some strength coaches that are going, we've got this travel schedule, we're in these cities, their sleep's disrupted, there's a whole bunch of other elements, and really it comes down to the stats. Are they getting on base? Are they getting their hits? And so on. When do you pull back the reins? What tells you that before there is a loss of athletic performance, what is your guiding light or your governing wire as you're progressing through the in season with your programs?
It's all about them. Like I said, I'm a very vocal coach. I like to sit down before, when I was at the time, when I was in college, sitting as a group, right? Very important, creating goals or kind of sticking to the same, goal throughout the season. And I've been fortunate to have players that will talk to me, right? Sit down. So by the time we get into season, I can kind of tell when you had either you had a rough night or, you haven't been sleeping well and things are there. And to just touch on the stuff too, I don't push hard like mentally with them. What I usually do is like 6 sets of 1 with box jumps, and then they're in and out in 20 minutes. So I'm not overloading the CNS. It's more elevating the, Louis Simmons type stuff where we elevate the testosterone, right? We wake everything up. We push the force production, but I'm not hammering them in terms of being in there. Most of the time they're in and out in 20 minutes. And I have found also in my throughout my experiences, I always leave it optional because I do know there's guys that don't want to do that. So for me, it's like, I need you to come in here and do mobility, but I'm going to have a lift before the game or whatever. You have to be in here twice a week, but I'm going to have a kind of a power development workout before the game or the day before, and then leaving that optional. Not that I wouldn't like anybody in there. I explain it to everybody, but no, I think that managing the load and the volume is most important. And I think that comes from knowing your players, right? And obviously you can know if they're BSing or whatever, but for me, it's always talking to them, right? Same thing with, just to point it out, to catchers, right? I'm always very careful with catchers, right? If they're like, hey, my legs are shot, I caught a double header, or I don't feel it, I kind of let them, just do mobility and things like that. But I think most importantly is I'm always in communication, right? By that time, I always know what all my guys need and what they want, how they are, how they react, guys that are trying to get out of things. And what works well for me is performance, right? If you can create something and they do it and then their velo goes up and they're getting more hits, they're going to buy in. If they're exhausted and they're striking out, you're going to have some things. So I think it's very important to just always make sure that you involve them, not to let them steer the ship, but, kind of let them hold the wheel and look at the horizon, if you will.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense now. And thanks for explaining that out. Definitely 20 minutes in, 20 minutes out makes a heck of a lot more sense than what I was thinking you were talking about. But not to completely change directions, but I'm interested more or less in your career path, because you told a little bit that you went down to Florida, but you've been in Brooklyn and you've recently relocated down to Dallas. I think, everyone's a little exhausted from COVID, and especially in some of the more urban environments like New York, I think that's even heightened. But you've left one practice or one kind of business up there and pursuing something else. That all these large things in our lives, these landmark events, are always paired up with polar opposite emotions, right? It's kind of fearful over joy, like, oh man, I'm going to go to a place I don't know. There's a lot of potential anxiety or uncertainty and fear, and yet I'm completely excited to get this new chapter in my life started. So with that, what is it that you're doing in Dallas now, and how are you building your world for those professionals in our industry who are thinking about doing the same? What is it that you're pursuing, and how are you going about it?
Yeah, great question. Well, we'll start, with COVID, we talked about Florida. I came home in June of 2020 from Florida, and I was upstate, and I had I didn't know what to do, right? Everybody stayed inside. So fortunately, I had started reaching out because before that, just to go back a little bit, I had a training business in the city. I was traveling around and training clients and athletes and things like that. And that's what I did all day. I trained here and there, and I would be bouncing around, and I would train some athletes and some teams. And then what happened was I went to Florida. We just spoke about that. When I came home, fortunately, I started reaching out to clients, and I got a little bit of a nice online business going, right? I had some people online, and then I started doing the podcast and kind of meeting more and more people. And this decision came, with a friend and stuff. So what we're, doing here is trying to take the online part and build it more with my friend, because he has very good expertise, strength coach, just like I am, brilliant person. And then eventually maybe, opening up a space of sort, nothing, ironclad just yet, right? We're trying to gauge the area while bidding online business. But for me, it was scary, but being in the minor leagues, right? And I'll just go back for the viewers to understand. When I was in high school, everybody I went to high school with went to the University of Albany, went to the Oswego's, and the Plattsburghs and things like that. If anybody's not familiar with that, they're upstate, right? They're in the middle of the woods. It's freezing cold, very close to Canada. That is what not everybody, but most people do where I come from. I took it, so did my sister, and I went to the city, right? So when I first did that, everybody's like, are you insane? Blah, blah, blah. So, to your point you brought up, it's one of those things where like, it's terrifying, but then when you move it kind of opens everything up. You're like, wow, I have to figure out everything now. And for me, that's always a very enlightening place, right? Coming to Texas. We talked about that before. My parents were like, what do you want to do? You got your bachelor's. I said, I want to go to Texas. You don't know anybody in Texas. Great. Let's go to Texas. Right. So the same thing there. I came to TCU and I, figured it out. And then the minor leagues, I always felt like this. One day I was a strength coach at LIU with all the players and coaches that I loved. And the next week I was in Florida at Port St. Lucie as a professional strength coach. And I didn't know a thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is kind of wild. So for me, that bouncing around has just been a way for me to mentally get better at things, and coming down here was, it was one of those things when I moved home initially, with my parents, it was, everybody knew I was going to leave. I knew I was going to leave, right? It wasn't like a shocking thing. It was just finding the right time. And fortunately, that's what happened. My friend came here, he got his feet wet, started working some places and stuff. And now, we're looking to pursue that. But I just think, to everybody out there, it's just important to do things like that. I know it's terrifying. Now, obviously, fortunately, I don't have any big responsibilities. I have family and kids and things like that. So I can kind of bounce around. But anybody that has that freedom, I don't really believe in, or I never have, in saying no to opportunities, right, that are in different places, because usually they always turn out well. Usually it's not, oh, I left this for a job and it was the worst thing on the planet, right? Think about, what can I do here, right, where I am now, right? Am I going to get to where I want to go, or is where I am right now going to, get me to the place that I want to be, or do I have to move, right? Because when you're starting over, isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you're carrying that experience that you have. So you're not really starting over. It's, I'm going to a different place, right? Different address, different zip code, weather, biggest thing. But, I have the experiences from all the places I've been and all the things in the wonderful journey I've been through. So for me, it's just finding a place or a spot and that I can take those experiences and share them with other people.
And so how are you tapping into that community right now as you build your business? What are the things that you're doing?
Just right now, like very, base ground, surveying the area, seeing what gyms are there, right? What kind of places that they have, finding out, where people go and things like that, going to local gyms, talking to people, kind of figuring out what is missing, right, in the area, right? Because they have a lot of, they have corporate gyms, your Lifetimes, your LA Fitnesses, and then they have, the garage gyms and things like that with fitness, but then they don't have a lot of, boutique things, right? High-end stuff, which is what I'm used to doing. So that's where, it will come first. And, like I said, grassroots, starting online, right? And not really breaking ground just yet, but, leaving yourself up for the opportunity. But biggest thing is learning, right? Learning the real estate, right? Which we've already started doing. Learning where everything is, where everybody goes, what people in the area do is very important, right? I was spoiled. I moved to New York City. Everybody in New York City, for the most part, has money, right? And everybody that you train who's going to pay you X amount of money to, come to their condo or their apartment, they're already going to have money. So prices aren't going to be a thing. So I think just advice out there early on to anybody listening who's interested is that identifying where you want to go, but also making sure that it kind of fits, right? It was either Texas really or Florida. The problem in Florida is I don't like the weather and the mosquitoes. And unless you move to Miami, they really don't have that New York feel. And, unfortunately too, with Miami is it's not the same money, meaning people go to Miami and then they go home, right? Not so much as COVID, but they'll go there, they'll have a house there, spend half the year there, then they'll go back to New York. Whereas Dallas is up and coming. I mean, if you're from here, anybody listening, it's like a construction site, right? Driving around, there's highways and all kinds of stuff. So just identifying that place and then just starting from the ground floor. And again, we're at ground floor level, right? Nothing crazy. It's more, learning experience as well as we go through this.
So you've been in basically three environs right now. You've been in the world of academia at LIU as a strength coach there, but you've worked with the Mets at the same time and in professional sports, and now you're in the private sector. Are those other two kind of yearning? Are you yearning for those? Are you kind of, or are you just going to explore the private sector? Do you want to get back into a university or a professional sports team?
I do yearn. It's just, I think, one of the things is, and I talk about it on my podcast, is the money. Unfortunately, in professional sports, they don't pay us any money. I'll say it, you making $50,000, or I made $12,000 for 6 months of work with the Mets, or 9 months, excuse me. I made $2,000 a month and slept in crappy hotels. And I was training millions of dollars worth of people. I was in charge of their team where they sent the first 10 rounds to me. And that's what I do, right? I had Conforto, Alonso. I'm not name dropping here because I'm not one of those people, but I had Conforto, I had Alonso, I had Rosario, I had, all these people. I had Reyes when he came back to them, and we rehabbed all these people, Harvey when he had his UCL, and they don't give you any money. There's just not, they kind of, it's one of those things where they don't need to. It's the New York Mets, it's the Seattle Mariners, it's the Texas Rangers, right? If I say I want more money, they can just get rid of me and somebody else will come. 1,000 people will come walking right through the door, with their hand out to get these opportunities. And for me, that was it. You're away from your family constantly, right? You never feel, humbled, right? I talked about somebody before about how, when you come back from the road, everybody has a house, a family, a job, and a pension, and you've just been on the road for 9 months and you really have nothing, right? You can't really buy a house somewhere because you're not going to be there for 6 months. And then when you leave these places, you have to start at zero, right? It's not like your pension and your experience follows you along and somebody's like, oh, great, you've been in the Mets for 3 years. Let me hire you with another team, and this counts as year 4, right? We're starting all over again. And the same thing in college after COVID, unfortunately, people aren't leaving these jobs. And so that is for me why I kind of got in the private sector. I miss teams. I won't sit here and say, I hated it and blah, blah, blah. I miss my players. I miss the teams. I miss the camaraderie. But again, it's, not that money runs the world, but if you can't justify a little, the money to, moving your life around, then there's no point in doing it, right? If I made enough money to, live and live where I wanted to be and be comfortable, great. But a lot of times it's not, right? You're struggling or living paycheck to paycheck. And you would think working for a professional sport or a high-end school that they would be able to provide you with enough money to live, and then just to, end the little rant you got me on, but I know people that have been there for 7 to 10 years and they make the same amount of money. They don't give them anything. And it's not like a respected thing. And it's at this point in it. I mean, I don't know how it is everywhere, but I do know a decent amount. It's like, they're like, here's 50 grand, take it or leave it. And they just wait till somebody comes in, and no longer do we look for people that are skilled, right? You could have all this certification in the world, but they're gonna be like, well, here's 45 grand, deal with it, right? And if you've been an intern or you've been, at the bottom of the barrel with a lot of this, you want money just to survive. I think that's what we're looking for too. We're not looking for $1 million. I just want, insurance, pension, and a salary. And unfortunately, you can't get that. So you have to go and kind of figure it out on your own.
Wow, that's really great insight, and it's probably something that isn't spoken all that much when I'm talking to the athletic trainers or strength coaches or performance directors and so on. Yeah, but it's no surprise at the same time. The players and the owners make the most, and unfortunately, those support cast, they just don't get the same consideration. And you mentioned your podcast, and I want to bring that up. It's the Strength Coach Experience podcast, and you've been doing it now for a little while, and you've had some nice names on it. Like you mentioned Lee Taft, and what are the things, like, for my own benefit, and it's somewhat selfish, having a podcast allows me a classroom from which I can learn. So I like to find people that are much smarter than myself and bring them on as my guest, because I learn so much from others around me. But what about your podcast? What do you get out of your podcast, and what do you hope you give the listening audience?
Oh, it's perfect. I think you hit it right in the head, the same as you, right? I originally, we spoke about, I started it to just keep in contact with friends and things like that. And then, much like me and you met on LinkedIn, with a message, I started, kind of go on LinkedIn or Instagram, you find somebody that you think's interesting and say, you know what, now I have this platform, so I use it the same, being able, like Lee Taft, I said it before, being able to talk to somebody like that for an hour or 2 hours, right? I think those experiences are, priceless, if you will, right? So being able to do that, I mean, I like to look for people that I want to talk to, but I also try to balance it out with things that, people in the field would like to listen to too, right? A lot of, getting a lot of different angles so that if somebody, the goal is that if somebody comes to my podcast, right, we find it online, I want you to say, okay, I would like to be an athletic trainer in college, and boom, you can go to an episode and I can give you, in that episode, explain to you the real nitty gritty, stuff that happens, right? And maybe have one or two options. Or I want to be a strength coach in the NFL. Boom, we have one or two people in there, but also bringing the experiences of people who got kind of the, short end of the stick, right? I'm not going to name names. You can go on there and listen to some of the episodes, but I've also had people that have had not nice experiences, and they were in high-end jobs, and similar things have happened. So the overall goal is just to provide a platform where somebody who's interested in a young age or even older age, doesn't matter, can go there and they can find somebody that they kind of relate to. And I hope that the way I do it and the questions I ask and the kind of free-flowing, open-ended way is nice for people to listen to, right? And I try not to be dry, because I can't stand a dry podcast. And the other thing is too, on a secondary level, is a place for people that may not be known as well to the world of strength conditioning, where they can come on and they're able to talk and they're able to, express their philosophies and just how they are as a person, and being a good human being, and letting people kind of discover them. And as I get bigger, hopefully in the future, knock on wood, being able to do that, right? Take people that don't have 700 million followers on Instagram and giving them to my podcasting and allowing 10,000, 20,000 people to listen to, right? And just to end it on that too, I was a big Joe Rogan listener. I still am. And what I got from him is I love the way he brings on a diverse amount of clients, bless you, and and being able to just talk to everybody, right? And I think that's so important too. I've had, entrepreneurs on my show. I've had people that do athletic training. I've had people that run businesses. So I think it's just important to listen to everybody, and I think that's helped me too, not really limiting myself. We talked about mentors before, not really limiting myself to just listening to Lee Taft or Mike Boyle, right? But getting out and listening to philosophers and people like that, or people that are straight in business, right? Because most people don't say, why would a strength coach listen to Grant Cardone, or why would a strength coach listen to Ed Milet? Well, because they're real estate mongols, but it's important, if you're going to start a business, to understand how they build their business. Because I don't think, besides, your Cressy's and your Borrows, but we don't really have a business mentor, if you will, in the field, right? Nobody's really, unless you want to look at, your corporate fitnesses that have built these gyms, but for the most part, there's really not a strength coach there that has 100 gyms spread throughout the country and has a philosophy and all these things that we can learn for. And there's no courses that say, you want to start a gym? Great. You need a sales team. You need this. You need to charge this. You need to figure out how much for this, how much commercial is, how much equipment. We don't have that, in my opinion, or not, at least not a lot of it. And I think it's something that we, should be more open about, right? I feel like people think, well, I'm in fitness, I don't need to worry about accounting, and I don't need to worry about money or property or how real estate works, where, where I've been, especially during COVID, was, no, I need to learn how to do all these things, right? Everybody says we should tax Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, or no, maybe we should figure out how they avoid paying taxes.
Not a bad thing. So that's great. They have a wide array of guests, and it's not only just within the circle of strength coaching itself, but what about some fringe guests? Are there some episodes that come to mind where you're kind of out there on the I won't say the cutting edge, but the fringe, and not the wild hair crazy scientists necessarily? I don't necessarily mean that, but those surprising episodes where you brought on a guest and it turned out to be something greater than you thought it was going to be.
I think for me, it was the getting into the technology space of strength conditioning or just fitness. I've had Quinn Saunder from Plantier from Canada on my episode, on one of my episodes. And I also have, I can't remember, I had somebody from Dynamic Resistance, I forget his name, but we just talked about technology, right? And what the Plantier is that it's an insert sole, and you put it inside your sneaker, and it analyzes your running gait, and it relays back foot striking and force and everything like that. And it literally tells you how you're striking and things like that. And it reads back the data. And for that, it was just kind of like a cool thing, right? Oh, let's get somebody on. This is kind of interesting. And, talking to these people and realizing that they have like these biomechanic degrees and how much they understand the foot, right? Or how much they understand how we move, and then like how these technologies are being built in like this amazing thing that like, I'm like, well, how come this isn't in every store, you know, every place it's ever been? Every strength coach should have one of these. Oh, you have new athletes here, put this, you know, insole inside your sneaker, walk around, and then when you come back in a week, I can look at everything and say, okay, well, you don't strike this way, you don't do this, right? You're walking bad. This is probably why you have bad knees and bad hips, et cetera, et cetera. But those things have been huge, right? I went on and, you know, I was just looking to talk about, you know, I thought it was going to be talking about just the technology, and then you find out so much more goes into it, the love and the admiration that they have for these things and how long they've been working to really put these things together, even though they turn out simple, right? Like a Fitbit looks real simple, but if you talk to people that do that, it's like a 12-15 year you know, event with scientists and things like that, just to get them off the ground. And then they have to go and get investors and things like that. So for me, I think that's the one that sticks out, or the ones that stick out, where you talk to somebody who's been working on a particular piece of equipment, right? And I've always been, you know, it's a piece of equipment, whatever, you know, technology. But when you get a chance to sit down with those people, you realize, and I think it's everything, you know, just to your point is, everybody I've talked to, I mean, I've had a friend here who does, you know, e-commerce, and he has a sports background. He was another one where just the passion and the want and the thing that they have for what they're doing. And it's not just through you. You realize that like everybody has a passion, right? And it's crazy that they just take a little part of your kind of, you know, the fitness industry, and they've gone out with it, but just realizing how much is out there and really how much you can learn too, if you really put your mind into it, right? Because they're not the same people. It wasn't like they went to Harvard or they got an MBA at MIT, right? They were regular people, right? Went to school, and then they've come up with these amazing products, amazing technology, and how they're able to just kind of change the world and kind of elevate themselves.
Yeah, technology is really coming on strong, from wearable tech or inserts, rings, and whatnot. Is if somebody just said, "Hey, whichever tech you want, you got it." Which one is up there for you? What do you rank as like the number one, whether for your own self or for your clients? But what's the one that's getting you the most excited?
I like the Aura Ring. Personally, I don't have one yet. I'm going to admit that on the air, but I think those things, stuff like that, with the wearables. I mean, I do have a Fitbit now that I wear, but I only wear it just so I can look at my heart rate when I do things, and I do like the body temperature at night, and the you know, the heart rate aspect, and as well as analyzing sleep. But I think the smaller wearables is where I'm excited, right? Aura does a wonderful thing with sleep and body temperature and things like that. And I think, well, you know, when they, you know, putting more things into that and analyzing stuff, but I really think I'm excited about the minimal wearing stuff, right? The Whoop is great, but it's a bracelet, and I'm not complaining about, you know, a bracelet or something you put on your ankle. But I think the ring stuff is great, and Aura is amazing. Like I said, I don't have one, but I know people that swear by them and they sleep by them. And the only reason I don't is because I'll forget to put it on my finger. But I'm really excited about the new wearables, and I think in time we'll have like, you know, a pinky ring that analyzes, you know, your form, you know, your sleep, your heart rate, and kind of, you know, explains to you when we're ready to start working out and everything else. And I feel like, you know, in terms of what I'm excited about is I think they're going to take all that technology, and it's just going to keep getting smaller and smaller, right? I mean, 20 years ago, a phone was in a briefcase, and now we get mad at them because you can't look up Google fast enough, and it's, you know, getting smaller and smaller.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll be passengers on board that train and watch the landscape as it travels by, because there's going to be a lot of amazing stuff that's coming out, and of course it accelerates with each passing year as technology advances on an exponential level. But back to your podcast, Joe. People want to tune in to the Strength Coach Experience. I imagine it's on Spotify and Apple and every platform you can imagine. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. We're on every platform. Like I said, Spotify, Apple, Google Play. In terms of episodes, I say I try, but usually once a week is when I try to put something out. Sometimes if I have somebody that, you know, gets, you know, that is getting a lot of views, a lot of traction, I'll let it go for, you know, another week. But obviously, you know, I try to get them out there on a weekly basis.
Beautiful. And if people want to learn more about your work in the Dallas area, they want to connect with you, we'll give you a minute here to tell us, yeah, how do we find more out about you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm on Instagram. It's strength_coach_experience, all kind of one thing, no spaces. There, I post all the upcoming, episodes as well as news on there. That's another great place. LinkedIn, I'm big on. I mean, we and you met through LinkedIn. I'm on there as Joe Lego, LEGO, just like the building blocks company. No relation to the plastic brick empire, but I am on LinkedIn as well. And then if anybody wants to send me an email, it's strengthcoachexperience@gmail.com. And just for everybody out there, I'm very, active on Instagram. I don't post pictures and stuff like that all the time, but I do try to put a post up. But if anybody wants any information, send me a DM, send me an email. I'm always, trying to help everybody. As we talked about before, I did teach, in college a little bit too with certain things. So as much as I can help, I will. If you have any questions about what do you want to do, if you want to start a podcast, if you want to get into certain sports, or even if, I've even said it too, if you want me to, not promise anything, but maybe be able to talk to one of the people I've had on my podcast, because they've always been very reluctant. Send me an email and I can kind of set you up with their Instagram or their DM, because again, this whole thing was created to help as many people as possible and just put people in a position to where they're comfortable with going to the next level, right? And not the uncertainties that I kind of had to go through, right? And not that it's in a negative way, but it's just, I wish I knew a little more about minor league baseball and how to, balance money and things like that, and a little bit more when I first got in, right? I'm thankful for my experiences and every wonderful thing I'm able to do, and love all my mentors, but just a little bit more knowledge, would have helped maybe, skew things a little bit, right? Maybe I would have been in certain positions longer than the others, but again, that's what I want to bring to everybody. And, just that kind of fun, open conversations as well, and not a dry, very structured conversation either, because I personally don't like to listen to those.
Yeah, well, that's the nice thing about our industry too, is that a lot of the presenters or leaders in the field are very open and welcoming, because that's how they got there, as well as they learn from others. And there's no closed doors. It's very rare that we'll actually find someone who says, no, I don't have time to give you or to talk. So I'm glad that you put your name in that hat, and I'm sure there's going to be a few people that take you up on that offer. And I just can't thank you enough for coming on, having a really cool conversation, getting me to understand a little bit more about your path and where you're going. So I just wish you well in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I know you're going to kill it.
Oh, thank you so much. And again, thank you. So grateful to be invited on the podcast and have the opportunity to speak to you.
And that's it for another episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you, Joe Lego, for coming on and giving us a little wisdom about strength conditioning, how it relates to baseball and outside the sport as well. Tune in next week and we'll have another great guest. In the meantime, be sure you tell a few friends about this. Now, I'm sure you've already subscribed, but maybe there's a few that could subscribe also, so they could join in every week and listen in just like you are. Until then, have a good one.